to use the phrase AI is almost like just saying air, oxygen, or petrol, or something like that, right? It is in this case, it's a technology that brings about a lot of capabilities, but it can be used in many different ways. So it's not just used in one specific way. There are aspects of AI that can be leveraged as an analysis tool, if you will, by data mining and amalgamating or distilling sort of idealized versions of, what makes a great song, or what makes the tone of an instrument sound best or sound good, and then comparing a song, or comparing the sound of an instrument against the idealized version, and giving you a sense of what you might do to change it. So that's one possible way of using AI, and it's actually a very powerful sort of new assessment tool, if you will, or way of sort of measuring your work against an idealized version of the thing that you're trying to produce. Um, and then there's generative AI, which is, I think, what we're hearing a lot about now, where you can suggest, using text generally, suggest either a genre or a tempo or a kind of song, and you can get AI to write lyrics, or you can get AI to actually create music that conforms to the description that you've generated. And in that case, it's kind of making something up. It's responding to a prompt on the part of the individual that's using it, and then it's creating something that is, more or less believable as a version of the thing that was requested. Um, so there are other kinds of ways of implementing the technology. There's something called differentiable DSP. And it's a really fancy way of saying you could sing into a computer, and what you sing would then be played back to you as if a saxophone had played it. It will transform the sound of a voice into a saxophone or a flute or a violin. So it will transform one thing into another and take attributes of the sort of the thing that you want to generate and map it onto the source material. Um, It's hard to quantify, but I think the tools, people are being exposed to them frequently and at a rapidly increasing rate. Um, and so I think I think there is um, a subsection of the community that is actively pursuing, trying to figure out how they can use it in their process. And the fact of the matter is that musicians historically, especially people who are involved in music production, tend to be Luddites. I mean, they work with an instrument that they know, or a technology that they know, and they kind of stick with it. And they're suspicious about new things, and they're slow to adapt and to adopt the new things. And I think rightfully so, because if you got to get work done, it's like if you're gonna drive a car to the market, and somebody says, "Hey, I got a better way to get you there. It might work. Let's find out." It was like, no, I actually need to go to the market to buy myself some milk and coffee because that's what I need, right? You're probably going to stick to the car that you know if it's going to. Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think that's another way of kind of slicing the bread, so to speak. I think for people who are hobbyists and people who just like to sort of dabble in music and music creativity and creation, it will reduce friction. Like if you want to sort of do something that makes it seem like you know how to play a violin, you don't have to go through all the steps of learning how to play a violin. So it's kind of, in that case, it's kind of a nice to have. Is it necessary in the world? No. Does it offer anything truly unique and different? Not necessarily. But um, it does offer real opportunities for new forms of expression to people who are creative and interested in sort of leveraging these tools. Like I said before, the ability to, for instance, voice your work in a new way easily without having to learn how to play the violin. Gee, I wonder what it would be like if this really sounded like a violin, and let me sing a few bars. Um, so is it necessary? I mean, we've been making music for thousands of years. Of course, it's not necessary. Does it represent some new, interesting possibilities? You bet. And the possibility of creating new genres, new works of art, and to some extent, one of the cool things about AI is that it has the potential to make our work more efficient by reducing, repetitive tasks and doing some of the things that might take us a long time to do just to set up to do the work. If you
Mm.
said to a system, set up a session, I want 8 tracks, label 3 of them with vocals, 2 of them for guitars, set up a drum kit, blah, 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 boom, go. And the machine just sets up your studio for you, and now it's time to get to work. I totally recognize your concern,
Mm.
and um, I think we're right to be concerned that there's the potential for a sort of a being driven towards a mediocre state where we're just repeating something that's been done before over and over again, um, and that people lose the. You could say in some ways that invention is the mother of um, sort of creativity, right? I mean, it gives rise to new solutions and new ideas. The, I may be a little bit naive and Pollyannish about this, but my feeling is that it's a very human thing to want to push the boundaries. It's a very human thing to want to be inventive and to create. And if we find ourselves in front of systems that just automate everything that we do, we lose interest. I mean, that is not why musicians, that is not why artists do what they do. They want to find their own voice and find a mode of expression to express something about what they see in the world or some idea or some create a love song or what have you. And there's no real sort of joy or juice in just pushing a button and saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
great, I'm done." What happens inside our brains in response to art is really where it's at, right? I mean, it's our relationship with what we hear and what we experience. There's an aspect of the story that's part of bringing back John Lennon's voice so that Paul and Ringo could play along, and George, who's now gone too, right?
Yeah.
And so if you start imagining that, you can sort of have this experience of emotion.
Mm.
So it has very little to do with the technology. It
Mm.
has to do with your experience of the story and of the art. But this is not a new idea. The Natalie Cole. I don't know if you have heard of Natalie Cole, but her father was a famous singer named Nat King Cole. She was able to pull up tapes and sang duets with her deceased father, and then release
Uh,
that as a record. And it was just beautiful because his voice sounded like it was from the distant past, and her voice
mm.
was very vivid and in the present, and it was like they were having a conversation together that
Mm.
was timeless in a
Yeah.
funny way. They were speaking to each other across the years. So it's the same kind of thing. But I think all of that happens, it happens here and it happens in our hearts. The technology just it facilitates some part of the process.
I mean, so
Well, and
yeah.
now this is interesting because, you have to consider that what we are learning about and hearing from and working with is the worst version of AI that we will ever use. 5 years from now, it's going to be a wholly different thing. And I think I'm reluctant to make predictions and say, oh, we would never feel anything from an AI generated piece of music. You know, most of the music that I hear that comes from AI, some generative platforms, sounds imitative and kind of mediocre. And frankly, the quality of the sound is very poor. And so I don't feel anything now, but I'm not going to promise you that I wouldn't feel something 5 years from now. I also think you can imagine we're going to find ourselves with new genres that come as a result of this technology, curated and inspired by things that people do. But I think there are going to be new works of art and new ideas and new experiences, and you may find yourself moved by them in ways that you
Mm.
you know you today would find surprising. Inevitably, things will change, yes, and there will be jobs that are lost, and there will be new ones that are created. What the net result is, I'm reluctant to make a prediction. You can look back in time at there was something called that was invented called MIDI in music, and there was a real concern that musicians were going to lose their jobs because of MIDI, because now you could have a band in a box in a studio by one person and didn't have to hire strings and so on and so forth. And in fact, there were some jobs that were lost, especially around orchestras for live events, for theatrical presentations. But were way more jobs and new workflows that were invented as a result of that particular technological development. In this case, will we have that same exact dynamic? I can't say for sure, but you have to assume that there will be some jobs or some roles that will change and some that will be lost. The thing that I worry about most, and in some ways, this is where AI could be an accelerant of something that's already happening, is the erosion of the economy around creativity and music. With the beginning of file sharing and in the digital age, there's been a kind of a diffusion of music, and it's been harder and harder to monetize music distribution. So it's become increasingly difficult for artists to make a living distributing their music. Now you worry that if it's easy for an AI to make, 1 million dance tracks to play in clubs, and that doesn't require a person anymore. Well, that's 1 million tracks that somebody's not going to get paid for, if it's royalty free. And that is a concern. And so I feel that there's potential if the audience isn't paying attention, if it's more sort of music that's incidental to something, whether it's dancing or, just background music, sort of wallpaper music, if you will, then I think there could be further erosion around the creative economy. I think that, I don't know what's happening all around the world. In the US, there are a lot of discussions and a lot of litigation that's going through the courts right now, that has to do with intellectual property rights and the monetization of them, and how do we deal with it, and is there potential for regulating it? I think we're a little behind the curve thinking about it right now, but I'm glad it's being thought about. And I think we have to wait and see kind of how this all rolls out. But yeah, I think we would be foolish to say that there's nothing to worry about or there's nothing to be vigilant about. But I don't think it's all bad news. I mean, for me personally, the thing that draws me to any creative work is the joy and the struggle. And keeping everybody, reminding ourselves of that and keeping everybody focused on that, I think gives us a greater appreciation for the truly human act of being creative, or an appreciation for the artists whose work we enjoy. And so I just want to say that out loud so everybody has a chance to hear it, because I think ultimately it is those things that make us human that are most meaningful and most valuable. And AI won't replace those things. Hopefully, AI will become a complement